afternoon, all. I hope you're continuing to stay safe and well. My name is Tapu, and I serve as the VP of Community Impact over Health and Funds Distribution at the United Way of Southeast Louisiana. I would like to welcome you all to our second equity learning opportunity, which is focused on inclusive language. This 60-minute session will discuss the concept of inclusion, what it is, and why it is important to our work, how work choice can foster a culture of inclusion, and say this, not that, best practice guidance for inclusive communication. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. This webinar will be recorded and will be sent out to all participants. And please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box and make sure that you respond to everyone or all panelists and attendees. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you all to Ms. Kiyomi Appleton-Gaines, our Vice President of Culture at United Way, who will lead us through this webinar. Kiyomi, please take it away.
Great. Okay, let me just get my screen shared. All right, well, thank you, Tap. Welcome to the Language of Inclusion. My name is Kiyomi Appleton-Gaines. I am Vice President of Culture and DEI here at United Way. My pronouns are she, her. And we're gonna be together for about an hour today. And I wanna invite you to take a moment first to just settle in a little bit. We all have so much to do these days, and in all these back-to-back Zoom meetings, it can be really tempting sometimes to try to multitask. But I want to invite us to put the morning aside, put the rest of the day aside, the other things that may be calling for our attention. And whether it's for the next 10 minutes, the next 30 minutes, or even the full hour, whatever you can do, just give yourself this time here with us. So I'd like to invite us all to just take a deep breath together in and then let it out. And one more time for those of you who did not do it the first time, take a deep breath in and then just let your shoulders relax as you breathe out. So here is our agenda for today. There we go. Now that we're all here, welcome. I'm so glad that you decided to spend this time with us. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about United Way's DEI journey today, a little bit about me, and then we're going to dive into our topic. And I'll save some time for questions toward the end, and Tap will be monitoring the chat box, so please put your thoughts there, and then I'll close us out. When you registered, we asked you what you wanted to get from this session. Some of the things you said were, how do we talk to people without hurting feelings? How do we just communicate better? How do we build this idea and these concepts into our work, our marketing, our tracking demographics, things like that? How do we speak to power and promote inclusion? And what are the mistakes that we don't even know that we're making? And what about pronouns and implicit bias? So we're going to talk a little bit about all of that. We'll talk about what inclusion is. We'll talk about language. And then we're going to talk about putting those two ideas together and how to do it. So our objectives today are that by the end of this hour, we hope to have a better understanding of inclusion and why it's important professionally, what inclusive language is and is not, and to have some ideas and some guidance on how to put it into practice. So United Way started this journey about 8 years ago now. To increase our relevance and our impact in the community, we turned outward and asked community members what were the most pressing issues and how could we help. The community told us that the biggest issue we're facing is poverty, but that to understand poverty, we have to view it through a lens of race and equity. And so through over 60 community conversations and countless volunteer and staff hours, we developed our blueprint for prosperity. And you will have seen this before. This blueprint is our plan to eradicate poverty in our 7-parish region by creating equitable communities. And we do that by supporting pathways to stability today and prosperity tomorrow within that framework of personal wellness and vibrant communities. So our mission at United Way is to eradicate poverty in Southeast Louisiana. Our vision is for equitable communities where all people are healthy, educated, and financially stable. And our credo is that we fight for those things for all of us. So once again, my name is Kiyomi Appleton Gaines. I'm a vice president here at United Way. My pronouns are she, her. I've been here for almost 7 years and leading our culture and DEI work here for about half of that. You can call me Kiyomi, but our stories begin long before our birth. They include so much more, all of our lived experience, more than just our name, our pronouns, our title, our organization. When we talk about inclusion, we need to dig a little bit deeper to recognize and consider those different experiences and perspectives. So before coming here, I served as an NGO consultant and a professional learning and development trainer in the Republic of Cameroon in West Africa with the Peace Corps. And before that, I spent 5 years working as a liaison for international and military and veteran student populations at Carnegie Mellon University. I'm also a certified HR professional, and I have a degree in cultural anthropology, which is the study of human cultures. But in addition to that work history, I'm also a military kid. I was raised in the Air Force. My family moved around the country often. And although I chose Peace Corps, not only my father, but my mother also served in the Air Force. And my in-laws, 3 of my brothers-in-law, my own brother, and my best friend are all veterans. I'm also the daughter of a Japanese American mother, which is where I get my name. And I was raised in a multi-generational household with my Japanese grandmother. So now you may not have noticed, but I look pretty white. In fact, that is how I am most often identified by others. Though you now know that there are other things that are really important to me and inform how I think of myself. So some of you who are gardeners may recognize the flower there as a peony. I went out for a cup of coffee a few months ago and the barista asked for my name, as they do. And when I got my cup back, that's what it said. It said peony. And I think that's a really cute name. I like it a lot, but it's not mine. And both innocently and not, my name is often mispronounced, misattributed, or my experience dismissed because although I am a minority woman, I have light skin privilege. I don't look Japanese enough. I've even been told that because I can pass as white, my lived experience is not as valuable. On the other hand, someone who knows my background wished me a happy Lunar New Year a few weeks ago. And so both of those things are a big part of my story, as you might understand. And these experiences allow me to bring a perspective that combines research and education with both that dominant culture and minority culture lived experience to kind of a global, national, and local perspective that helps me to navigate some of that insider and outsider status. So when we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about honoring who people are. Inclusion is showing value and respect for the talents, beliefs, backgrounds, and ways of living of other people. It's giving space, giving quiet for others to tell us who they are without rushing to fill that space with our own labels. So inclusive language aims to name and honor and value different aspects of identity. Think about if you were leading this conversation today. What are some of the key things that you would want to share about who you are and what's important to you as we begin this conversation? And while you're thinking about that, I want to share our definitions of diversity and equity. So often grouped together, diversity, equity, and inclusion are distinctly different yet interrelated ways of operating and engaging as an organization. Diversity is the range of human differences, including all those points of our identity. We recognize that people are different and we invite them to the table to bring those perspectives and those experiences. Inclusion is involvement and empowerment. This is where we value those differences and prioritize the voices of lived experience and decision-making over those who maybe don't have experience with certain life events and perspectives. And equity is that quality of being fair and impartial. So it's the intentional inclusion of everyone in society. And we will know that we've achieved that when points of identity are no longer determinants of outcomes. So what is inclusion? As a United Way community, we collectively defined inclusion as involvement and empowerment, where the inherent worth, dignity, where the inherent worth and dignity of all people are recognized. And an inclusive environment promotes and sustains that sense of belonging, and it values and practices respect for the talents, beliefs, and backgrounds of its members. So in thinking about these big unwieldy topics, it can sometimes help to define their opposites. So I want you to think now about a time when you felt excluded. Maybe you were left off of a group text with friends or family, or maybe you weren't looped in on a meeting at work. But think about what feelings did that bring up for you? Did you feel ready to engage and bring your strengths and your story to the conversation at that time? Probably not. Often instead, exclusion feels pretty isolating, which can very quickly either lead to us starting to doubt our own abilities or begin to disengage. So what happens next? Let's say you're later invited into the group, but the decisions have already been made. You're told what the plan already is and what you're expected to do, what your part is expected to be, because they already talked about the details without you. What feelings does that bring up? Is it easy then to speak up, to renegotiate and reevaluate all the decisions that were made before you came in? So this is what we call the inclusion framework. You can see along the top, we have high and low belonging, and along the side, we have high or low value for uniqueness. And what we mean by uniqueness is that diversity and perspective of experience that we were talking about just a minute ago. Belonging here refers to how much someone is made to feel like they are part of the group. And you can see where there's low belonging and a low value of uniqueness, we have exclusion. You're not part of the group and you're not valued for what you have to offer. Low belonging and a high value of uniqueness is called differentiation. This person is appreciated for what they do, for how they fill the needs of the group, but not for who they are. This group here is, but what are they doing? They're checking the diversity box. This person is likely to feel tokenized and feel taken for granted. High belonging and a low value of uniqueness or assimilation really isn't much better. This person is doing what's referred to as covering. They're blending in, accommodating, not speaking up, succumbing to that pressure to just be like everyone else. This is where we see code switching. And I made myself a note. Code switching is, it's a social sciences term from social work or from anthropology or other humanities. It refers to when a person belongs to two separate culture groups, two or more, and changes their language in between groups. And we'll talk a little bit more about language in just a bit. But this person who is experiencing assimilation are likely to engage in this kind of code switching because the group will say, or the impression that they're given is that who they are is great as long as they don't rock the boat. And finally, we get to high belonging and a high value for uniqueness, and that's where we find inclusion. You're part of the group. You don't have to hide any part of who you are, and your unique experience is valued. Okay. So why is this important in a professional context? So think back to that feeling of exclusion again. We all want to do a good job and feel proud of our work. We don't want to be disengaged. And we should want to support our colleagues to do their best work too. If for no other reason than that it just makes our own lives easier. But we can't be at our best and we can't do our best work if we don't feel like we belong and when we feel like we're not wanted and not valued. So non-inclusive spaces can lead to those who are not part of the dominant culture covering part of who they are or feeling tokenized. And the costs of covering aspects of identity or inversely feeling too visible and feeling called upon to represent an entire group of people can lead to disengagement and presenteeism. And when this happens, we miss out on the creativity and innovation, the increased productivity, the revenue generation, and the reputation that comes from diverse spaces. And those spaces where people feel valued and respected for their difference. So people with minority identities can become really exhausted by this. And just a note on that, presenteeism and disengagement happen first and come at a cost to the organization in about 20% of productivity and 20% cost and profitability. And then later, when that person leaves, it costs around another 20% of that person's salary to hire and train someone new. So in addition to just being the right thing to do, being inclusive makes good business sense. So inclusion comes in at this point. Inclusion says, we don't have just a single token person and check the box and say we're done. We don't expect people to just smile and be quiet and blend in. Inclusion means making people feel welcomed and respected and valued. And not just that we think they are, but that they think they are. It allows us to gain the benefit of hearing more ideas, hearing more solutions, and to choose the very best of those options based not only on data, but also lived experience. It allows us to reach more people because we've not only listened, but we've actually heard them. And our materials and our outreach, whether figuratively or literally, are speaking their language, right? And a big part of this at a basic level comes down to how we communicate with each other. So what is inclusive language? First, inclusive language is not about being politically correct. It's not about having the right vocabulary. It's not about calling someone out for using the wrong word. It's not about signaling any kind of political ideology or religious beliefs. It's not about protecting someone's personal feelings over professionalism. I propose that inclusive language is about three things. It's about being intentional, it's about communicating clearly, and it's about being thoughtful in our word choice, by which I mean we've actually thought about what it is we're trying to say. Though inclusive language may sound like something new, anyone who has ever written a paper or had an important conversation has already done this. So Ronnie Sloan of the Sloan Group says, inclusion is being welcomed, respected, valued, and heard. And that sounds like basic professionalism to me. At a very minimum, when engaging with our work colleagues, we should welcome their presence and their contribution to our work. We should treat them with respect. We should value their insight and their expertise. And we should listen to their ideas and recommendations, even if we don't agree or even if we don't end up taking that path. We should still listen. And so we say that inclusion is a value and a practice of respecting each other's difference. So inclusive language is intentional. It's about avoiding that alienation and that disengagement that comes when people feel excluded. Inclusive language instead seeks to actively engage. It's being intentional, as with so much of this work, about the kind of environment and the kind of culture that we're creating. It's intending that all of our stakeholders are allowed to share their insights about decisions that may impact them. Nothing about me without me is a good way to remember that. The first step to inclusive language is that we be intentional. We have to make plans and take steps to do it on purpose. We have to decide that everyone deserves to be treated professionally and with respect. Inclusive language is clear. So let's talk about language for a minute. Language is a set of agreed upon symbols that follow certain agreed upon rules that, when heard or viewed, convey a message. So let me say that again. Language is a set of agreed upon rules or agreed upon symbols that follow agreed upon rules that, when heard or viewed, convey a message. And this can include words, whether that's spoken or written. It can include pictures like street signs. It can include gestures, as in American Sign Language, or it can include body language. If we share the same set of symbols and rules with another person or close enough, we can communicate. When we talk about a language of inclusion, we're talking about being intentionally very clear in the messages we send. We're being clear in the symbols and the rules that we're following. Because clear is kind. Clear prevents mistakes, and clear saves us time and effort and resources. Inclusive language is sending a clear message. And what do I mean by that? In the United States right now, somewhere around 3% of individuals like me identify as mixed race or multiracial, and that number is expected to double. Over the next 20 to 30 years, depending on where in the country you're looking, the United States will become majority minority. Globally and nationally, we are becoming more diverse. That means that more and more people are coming into our workplaces and interacting with each other with experiences and perspectives that are different than the dominant culture. As that continues to happen, words and phrases that at one time were in common use will fall out of favor because they just don't mean the same things to everyone. Being inclusive in our language, using words or images that mean the same thing to the people we're communicating with, and not using words or images that don't, allows us to be clear in our message. It allows us to communicate what we intend to communicate. So communication is that process that involves word choice, tone, physical posture, facial expression, gesture, environmental and relational context. It uses all of those things to take an idea out of one brain and put that idea into another brain. But in between those two brains is what we call static. This static can include everything from where and how a conversation is being held, previous conversations that two people have had with each other, previous conversations that two people have had with different people in similar contexts or on related topics. It can include things like how well one or both parties slept the night before, or whether they're thirsty or hungry or bored. It can include what their mood might be at that time. Static also includes the literal physical noise and distractions in our environment. So we don't always have a choice about those things, but what we can always choose are our words. And the words we use to describe people and things informs how we think about them. By taking care to use language that's free of bias, we can examine our own biases, which are often unconscious. This can be uncomfortable, I'm not gonna lie, but that's okay. It's supposed to be. So learning and growth are always a little bit uncomfortable. If we're not uncomfortable, we're not growing. So it's supposed to be a little bit uncomfortable. Inclusive language is word choice, tone, behavior, and communication that is intended to communicate our messages clearly and to avoid using phrases and words that may be harmful, exclusive, or single out an individual. It's thinking about the message you want to send and choosing words that simply mean what it is you mean to say. For example, and this is a super simplified example. If I say, hey guys, who am I talking to? This is one that I do all the time, but what's the picture in your mind? So research shows that when we use gendered language, it translates to gendered ideas in our brain. So if I say, hey guys, our brains hear male and prioritize male. If I'm speaking to an all male group, that's great. But in addressing a group who isn't all male, I don't mean to say, well, I'm going to say hi to all of you who are male identifying, but not the rest of you, right? Like, so who am I talking to? What am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is hello to everyone. So I can be inclusive on purpose. I can actually think about what it is I'm trying to say, and I can communicate more clearly just by swapping out one word. It's a little awkward at first. It's like if you're closing your hands up with the wrong thumb on top. But the brain is making new connections and new pathways every time we do that. And it's learning and it's growing, and it's a little uncomfortable, but it gets easier. So each of these topics could take an entire hour all on their own, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention them. Microaggressions and pronouns. So microaggression is the opposite of what we've been talking about. Microaggressions are words and behaviors that make someone feel unwelcome, excluded, or singled out. Historically, the default correct usage of the English language has tended to assume that people are English or of European descent. Also, male identifying, cisgendered, straight, Christian, able-bodied, educated, and landowners. And there isn't anything wrong with being any of those things or being all of those things. But that also doesn't describe everyone that we want to talk to. And while people who fit those descriptions have really specific and valuable perspectives, that isn't the only perspective that's valuable to our work. So microaggression is not necessarily open hostility or bullying or harassment, though it can be part of those things. But more often, microaggression is unintentional. It happens because we become too focused on what is different about another person. Maybe because we just really don't want to make a mistake, but our brains get stuck on that difference. And we move in the direction that we are focused on. So think about when we drive or throw a ball or even just walk down the street, we naturally move towards those things that we're looking at, towards those things that we're focused on. And the same thing happens with our communication. So going back to our inclusion framework, microaggressions are messages and words that highlight differentiation or encourage assimilation. And we can learn to avoid a lot of that just by being intentional, being clear, and thinking about what we're saying. So words and common phrases have meanings, they have histories, they have contexts. And by taking the time to understand some of that and to speak with intention and clarity and forethought, we can make sure that we know what we're saying and that we're not saying anything that we don't mean. So for example, the phrases grandfathered in and sold downriver are things that I used to say. They're things that I grew up hearing people say, and I learned kind of in a general way that their meanings are more or less to allow something based on precedent or to commit some kind of interpersonal betrayal, right? But both of those phrases also have very specific historic contexts and meanings related to racial discrimination. So I didn't know that, but I learned better, and now I try to do better. So this brings me to pronouns. Our pronouns are, along with our names, it's the ways that other people talk about us. Generally, they are third-person identifiers of she, her, he, him, and they, them. And when we talk about the sex of an individual, we're talking about physiological structures in the body. When we're talking about the gender of an individual, we're talking about social and cultural identity. Cisgender means that whatever the doctor identified a person as when they were born is the same gender that that person identifies as for themselves. Usually, if a cisgender person is identified by the doctor as female, they will use she, her pronouns. But people who are non-binary or transgender or intersex may identify themselves differently than how the doctor identified them. And they may ask that we use pronouns that are different, that are the way that they identify, the pronouns that they identify with, rather than what the doctor said. So remember that inclusion is about recognizing how people identify themselves. Now, earlier on, I identified myself as Kiyomi Appleton Gaines, pronouns she, her. I invited you to call me Kiyomi. Now, I might have said, I go by K, or call me KG, or I prefer Ms. Gaines, or yes, that's my name, but I go by Rachel. If I asked you to call me Rachel, even if that made you curious, I bet you would still call me Rachel. I invited you to call me Kiyomi, so I'm willing to bet that you aren't going to decide instead to call me Apple. But why not? So this isn't about politics, and it isn't about belief systems. If you call me something different than what I ask you to call me, I wouldn't know that you were talking to me. Or if you were talking to someone else, they wouldn't know that you meant me. Now, different cultures have different perspectives and different attitudes toward nicknames, but generally, when someone tells us what we should call them, that's what we should call them. To do otherwise is usually considered rude. So how do we know what to call someone else? Well, we ask, what's your name? What should I call you? But we usually don't start a conversation asking for someone's name. Instead, we begin with who we are. Hi, I'm Kiyomi Appleton Gaines. My pronouns are she, her. You can call me Kiyomi. And usually people will respond in the same way. So allow me to just touch briefly on the singular they. There is a counterpoint to using they, them pronouns that says that it's incorrect grammatically. It's not proper English. Well, I submit to you that the first recorded usage of the singular they was in 1375. That was in a story called William and the Werewolf. And that's according to the Oxford English Dictionary. Chaucer and Shakespeare also used a singular they. And if you really want to go down an internet rabbit hole, look up the history of the word you, which is actually plural. There's just no reason not to call somebody what they asked to be called. So how do we do it? How do we put it all together? Put people first. Always start with the person. Remember that there is a human being on the other side of any interaction. Lead with the person, not the characteristic. Use universal phrases. Know your audience. Use more than one kind of metaphor. For example, if you're going to use a sports metaphor, not everyone follows sports. Now, I'm not saying don't talk about sports or don't use that as an example, but that can exclude some people or they might miss your point. So use different kinds of metaphors. If you're going to use a sports metaphor, make sure you use another one too, so that everybody can understand what it is you're trying to communicate. Or if your audience is from another culture or if English is not their first language, you may want to avoid metaphors altogether. Remember, be intentional, be clear, and be thoughtful. Recognize the impact of mental health language. Don't call people crazy. Don't blame tragedies on mental health issues. And try to get rid of phrases like, oh, I'm so OCD. Those are very real challenges that real people live with. Be aware of gendered language. Don't say, hey guys, when you mean hey everyone. Some words and phrases are more associated with men than with women as well. And this can be particularly important when it comes to things like job descriptions. For example, the word driven in a job description can lead to more male applicants than female applicants. Is driven really the best word for that qualification? Or are we maybe looking for someone who will commit to our mission and values? Or maybe someone who can put in late nights and weekends? So again, what is it that we mean to say? What are we really trying to say here? And let's say that. There are also free tools online that you can use, that you can run documents through to check for gendered language. Off the top of my head, there's one called Alex, and there's one called Gender Decoder, and I know that there are others as well. If you just Google gendered language tracker. Be thoughtful about imagery. This is related to a metaphor, but also to marketing and communication more generally. In old movies, you could always tell who the hero and the villain were because the hero was the guy in the white hat and the villain wore a black hat. So don't do that. Don't reinforce stereotypes. And use people's preferred pronouns. Call people what they want to be called. Some other ways to be inclusive. One of the best ways to find out about people is, of course, just to ask. So do collect demographic information from your stakeholders. And you can also ask what they prefer to be called and ask about pronouns. And also remember to communicate why you're asking. It's okay to let people know that you just want to engage more within a community, serve more community members, and that you want to know how to address people properly. When it comes to decision making, bring stakeholders in to the conversation who will be affected. Remember, nothing about me without me. Ask people about what issues are important to them. Ask what matters about those things, and ask how do they talk about those things. Within an organization, consider who holds power, who is the decision maker, who controls funding, and ask how can we be more inclusive about those decisions. And don't single out team members from a given background. Although we want to work to create an environment where everyone feels comfortable sharing their ideas and their expertise, no one is owed someone else's story. What we are entitled to from our team members is what is in their job descriptions, not their cultural expertise, not their language skills, not anything else. If you have someone doing sensitivity reading or translating or other lived experience or cultural fluency work, make sure that you're compensating for them, compensating them for that work as well as any other work that they may be doing for you. So with that, I will open it up to you. What are your thoughts and questions or interests, or what other things would you like to share about inclusive language? Tap, do we have any questions in the chat box?
Currently, there aren't any, so please, I welcome you all to post any comments, any questions, any thoughts you may have so far in this presentation.
It's a big topic, and today we're only touching on a little bit of it. Inclusive language is not all of inclusion and what it means to create an inclusive environment, but it is a step that we can take. Again, we can choose our words, and we can think about being intentional, doing it on purpose, being clear about what it is we're trying to say, and being thoughtful about the words that will convey that idea clearly. It can help us to cut through some of the static and some of the chatter. So I'm going to give us just another moment. If not any questions, are there any thoughts or interests or points that anyone would like to share before I wrap us up? And remember to set your settings to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see. Okay. Well, just some final thoughts that I will share with you then. Inclusion is involvement and empowerment, where we recognize the inherent worth and dignity of all people. And an inclusive environment promotes and sustains that sense of belonging. So we are recognizing and valuing uniqueness and promoting a sense of belonging to create inclusion. It values and practices respect for the talents, beliefs, backgrounds, and ways of living of the members of our community, whether that's our workplace, our friend group, our community at large. Inclusion happens when we have that high sense of belonging to the group, aligned with that high value for the uniqueness of the individual. So we are not saying, we love you, but don't rock the boat. And we're not saying, you're different, and we're just going to focus on what you can do for us because you're different. Instead, we're going to say, we value who you are as a person. We value your unique perspectives, your unique experiences, and what that adds and contributes to our work. And also, we love you, and you're part of the team, and you're important to us as a person. A lack of inclusion can lead to presenteeism and disengagement for the individual, and it can lead to a loss of the benefits of diversity for an organization. So we really want to prioritize this. It has a place within our professional work environments, as well as in the rest of our lives. And inclusive language is one way to foster inclusion. It's a big topic. There are a lot of different pieces and parts to kind of dive into, but this is one way that we can really practically engage with this. Inclusive language is intentional. It's clear and it's thoughtful communication. And so if you're talking to someone about why this is important, it's just good communication. It's being intentional and clear and thinking about our word choice. So decide to do it on purpose. Get clear about what it is you want to say and who you want to say it to, and choose words that mean what you mean. And with that, thank you very much for your time and for your attention. And if anybody does have thoughts or questions or other considerations, please feel free to reach out to me. I love talking about this work, and I love learning from other people who have different ideas and different experiences to bring to it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kiyomi. And then I'm just going to read out some general comments from the chat box that came through. So thank you, Sivan, for your comments. Just said, thanks, very clear. Sorry, no questions from me. You're doing well. And overall, I think it's difficult to learn how to suppress their own curiosity in order to avoid microaggressions. Very true. Erica mentioned that she used the word you guys earlier, so thanks for the heads up. And then Josh, thanks so much for the thoughtful presentation. So thank you all. Kiyomi, I want to thank you for leading us through this webinar on inclusive language. It's been extremely informative. And a huge thank you to all of our attendees for joining our second equity learning opportunity on inclusive language We certainly value your time, talent, and treasure, and we hope that this has been really helpful in your own equity journey. As a reminder, we will send out the link to the recording of this webinar. And if you have not done so, please sign up for our e-newsletter and follow us on all of our social media channels to receive all of the up-to-date information on our work, as well as our equity journey. So again, thank you. And with that, I'll give you back 15 minutes of your time.
All right, thanks everyone.